This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, investor sentiment across emerging market stocks rose today as China reported record first quarter GDP data, which of course pointed to strong domestic and overseas demand. South Africa's JSE All Share climbed almost 1% as risk appetite soared. The financial, resource and industrial indices all climbing today. Resources specifically were up about 1.57% on the day. Of course, market heavyweight Naspers topping the value and volume charts as Tencent gained 0.24% in Asia. In Nigeria, the All Share ended in the red. Analysts anticipated the loss as, of course, treasury yields continue to climb, which has an inverse correlation with stocks' performance in the country. Now, also coming up on today's show. Africa trade dips by 11.9% due to COVID-19 in 2020. China's economy bounces back by 18.3% in the first quarter of this year. And this Ugandan startup turns discarded banana stalks to eco-friendly items. Now, African trade contracted about 11.9% in 2020 as the coronavirus pandemic and restrictions to curb its spread pushed the continent into its first recession in a quarter of a century. A report shows that the greatest impact was on economies dependent on tourism and commodities. Leading oil-producing nations, where oil exports account for more than 90% of foreign exchange earnings and more than 60% of fiscal revenues, were also badly affected. The pandemic also raised risk premiums, made it harder to access trade finance, and reversed capital flows, which exacerbated existing liquidity challenges and, of course, balance of payment pressures. Well, joining us to take apart the impact of COVID-19 on Africa's trade outlook is business, finance and trade investment analyst Mfoeng. Great to have you with us on the show, sir. Now, though this 11.9% contraction in trade was synchronized across Africa in 2020, we can also argue that regions such as East Africa did report improvements in trade. That, of course, due to increased intra-regional trading. At least that's what the data is showing us. What is your assessment on the extent of the impact of the pandemic on Africa's trade performance?
Good evening, Uche. We saw, as you mentioned, we saw that Africa suffered its first recession in 25 years, effectively really as a result of global trade contracting 9.2% in 2020. We also saw economic activity show sharp falls as a result really of the lockdowns and border closures. Those border closures restricted movement and they caused disruption in African trade, reversing the gains that we'd been seeing in the past few years. All of these factors mean that African countries, which were largely undiversified, felt the biggest pinch of the pandemic. And we saw those, as you already mentioned, being countries that were dependent on tourism and export of natural resources, having the largest fall in growth as movement was restricted. Even banks, we saw banks across Africa really have an increase in demand for trade finance because the challenging business climate saw businesses have to go to banks in order to assist with the poor cash flow and working capital.
Now, of course, one thing that the report did indicate is the fact that COVID-19 has worsened trade finance difficulties in Africa. Now, how badly do you think the financial shock and, of course, the resulting instability has, of course, impacted the financial services sector across Africa, going forward especially?
We effectively saw two impacts. So the first one we saw was really that the pandemic caused an increase in risk perceptions in the expectation that most economies would actually suffer in 2020. This is obviously was made worse by the inability to know how long this recession will actually last and how deep it'll be. So we saw banks brace themselves for increased risk, business failures, and bad debts. And this forced credit teams to therefore tighten their conditions and reduce appetite for lending, which was actually quite bad because that meant that they couldn't give out business loans to businesses, which effectively reduced at a time when those businesses needed financial support the most. So that exacerbated, obviously, the recession. The second impact that we saw was tighter global financing conditions, which triggered massive capital outflows from Africa due to the same risk perceptions and a flight to safety. This resulted in reduced liquidity in the market, and therefore we started to see widening interest rate spreads, which led to capital being a lot more expensive and shutting down a lot of borrowers out of the capital market. And I think in the past few weeks, as results have come in from different banks listed on stock exchanges, we've seen a lot of poor performance and stock prices dropping.
Now, coincidentally, COVID-19, of course, coincided with the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Some experts say this pandemic could help speed up Africa's integration agenda going forward as it pertains to trade. How much do you expect to see the AFCFTA impact a rebound in trade this year on the continent?
I agree with the statement that you made, Uche. We've seen Africa expect its GDP growth to grow by about 3.4% in 2021 as we start rolling out the vaccines and we start to seeing a lot more trade. Unfortunately, though, this will be the slowest growth of any region in the world, largely because the vaccine rollout is slower than in other regions. We should also see a recovery of debt levels across Africa, and this should help trade and increase regional trade. So we should expect to see banks get back into the business and starting to assist with a lot more trade financing. The good thing is that COVID has forced governments to interact and benchmark with each other, and we've also seen a lot of innovation in businesses and policy making. So you've actually seen a lot of the development financing institutions being forced to innovate and quickly unveil new facilities. So all of these innovations that have been forced by COVID have forced regional financial institutions to integrate and remove a lot of bureaucracy, and this will bode well going forward. So what we have seen is COVID has forced the economies to become a lot more efficient, moved a lot more towards being digital, and this should propel them to grow faster as we get into a more data-driven society that should, move Africa towards digital trade and e-commerce much better.
Quite interesting. Well, we do have to leave it there, Mfoeng. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. That, of course, was Mfoeng. He's a trade analyst. Well, let's move on now. The levels of debt distress across the African continent have surged amid the coronavirus pandemic. This has seen an estimated 32 million people cast into unemployment and on the brink of poverty. Well, CGTN's Ramanyang spoke to the International Monetary Fund's African Director, Abebe Selassie, on the debt service obligations by governments amid drops in revenue earnings and contractions in the job market.
At the most concessional form of financing that's available, basically what happens is that countries get access to the equivalent portion of their quota in the IMF that will add to their reserves. These resources can be used to, procure really important things that countries need right now. A good example is to pay for vaccines, or indeed other development spending needs that have with an import component. So this general allocation, which looks set to move forward after endorsement by our governing board, should help countries to a significant degree. About 23 billion out of the 650 billion allocation will be going to sub-Saharan African countries. And that certainly would be a useful development. Do you think this, given the need for reprofiling at this point in time, Ghana tapped the market just recently, raised about $3 billion from the markets. Are we in that prime window to start reprofiling, refinancing the debt that we have due? Because come 2024, 2025, the refinancing needs at those points essentially just jump up to something like, I think it's almost $8 billion a year. So, debt management, debt sustainability issues have to be done on a country-by-country basis, and really depends on each country's circumstances. So reprofiling maybe what countries need to do proactively, depending on market conditions. If you already have Eurobonds outstanding that you want to push back maturities further down the road. So it really depends on the specificity of the country's debt profile and financing needs.
Let's talk about Kenya, to be specific, because when we speak about a lot of the debt issues across the continent, one of the most interesting things about this story has been how some Kenyan taxpayers has responded to the 2.34 billion agreement that was struck between Kenya and the IMF, and the argument they were making, and they practically flooded IMF events on this most of last week, was saying, look, we don't need more debt. What are your impressions when you saw that?
Okay, so a general point and then a more specific point on this. So the general point is that our countries are face what I've been calling a trilemma. Okay, we face tremendous development spending requirements, the ones I flagged earlier. The needs to continue to electrify our countries, to invest in health, education are just immense, right? So that's one element of the trilemma. The second one is, of course, debt levels have been increasing over time in our countries and region, and of course that's also a source of concern. And you have to be careful in terms of how you add to that. That's the second element of the trilemma. The third one is revenue mobilization. The way to minimize debt buildup, of course, is by paying more, by collecting more taxes, citizens being willing to pay more taxes. But that has also proved quite challenging for our countries. So that's the third element of the trilemma. How we manage this trilemma really will determine how effective, how successful we are in creating fiscal space to address many of the development challenges that our economies face.
Indeed, the report also makes the argument that there's room for making tax administration a lot more efficient. And one of the key ones that you point out is that you've got this VAT efficiency rate of 35%, pretty much across the region. The global average is closer to 50%. But beyond the things you've mentioned, removing and streamlining exemptions, which some countries tried to do, Kenya tried to do that back in 2013. But what else can be done? Because we're framing this against the context of the job losses that you mentioned earlier, an 8% decline in net employment. In Kenya, it was 1.7 million people out of work in the second and third quarters of the year. So available jobs are going down, but at the same time, we need to raise more money. So how do we square that circle?
That goes back a little bit to this trilemma point that I made our countries facing. One element of the trilemma being tax revenue mobilization. Look, I think, first point to make is that, taxation is always a very deeply domestic and political issue. The level of taxes people are willing to pay also depends, of course, on their social contract, the compact between people and the government, and how effective they see the government being. So you cannot take that away from that. So there is that political side to the question. But there are also technical things that can be done to make sure that you have, for example, as you noted, tax administration is not cumbersome. Perhaps using technologies to a lot more digitalization. By no means is this, a silver bullet, but creating platforms, more options to allow people to pay taxes. I think, though, a lot of investment also has to be made by governments in showing what this money is being used for.
And now a look at our corporate headlines today. Pharmaceutical companies supplying South Africa with COVID-19 vaccines are pressing the nation to stop trying to loosen patent protections related to the inoculations. Now, South Africa and India are calling for a broad waiver of World Trade Organization rules on the production and export of vaccines and other medical goods needed to combat the coronavirus. That's a move that could increase access to treatment for developing nations. Meanwhile, the two biggest unions representing workers at South Africa's Eskom are seeking a 15% wage hike, adding to the woes confronting the loss-making power utility. Now, the Eskom spokesperson says the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa and the National Union of Mine Workers presented their demands at a preparatory meeting on Friday, and that pay talks will resume on May 4th. Meanwhile, MTN Group and Airtel Africa were given the green light to resume the sale of new SIM cards in Nigeria, and that's following the implementation of a new policy linking them to national ID numbers. The Federal Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy says the issuing of SIMs and other suspended activities can restart on April 19th. That's after wireless operators were ordered to stop activities in December. And finally, Australia's federal court has found that Alphabet Google's misled some consumers about personal location data collected through Android mobile devices. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission says it is seeking declarations and penalties from Google, though it did not specify an amount. The Commission's chair says the ruling is an important victory for consumers, especially anyone concerned about their privacy online. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're going to take a short break now, still coming up on the show. South Sudan gives out hard currency to commercial banks to try and revive the ailing economy. And Nigeria places sugar and wheat on its forex exchange restriction list.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, the Bank of South Sudan has started giving hard currency to commercial banks in order to try and revive the ailing economy. The central bank says it will avail about $5 million every week to financial institutions to help stabilize prices in the market. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with more.
South Sudan Central Bank says commercial banks will access the monies through auction. According to the central bank, 22 financial institutions applied for the support, but so far 20 have received the hard currency. The central bank is giving $3 million to commercial banks and $2 million to foreign exchange businesses.
Every week we'll be auctioning $5 million, and therefore in a month we'll be auctioning not less than $20 million. And I think our market is very small. It will have a significant impact in the market in terms of the stability of the exchange rate and therefore the stability of prices.
The 6 years of civil war, limited production and increased government borrowing from local commercial banks to finance the deficit has stifled growth, but the return to relative peace recently earned South Sudan a loan of close to $175 million from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. South Sudan depends largely on oil money, which funds more than 98% of its budget, but the fall in global oil prices has diminished the country's revenues. However, economic experts argue that the government needs to do more to revive the economy.
If all the money generated, like for example from the oil, comes through the central bank, and the central bank regulates the use of the money and the currency in the country, whether it is foreign currency or our local currency, then the central bank will have the powers to control the economy of the country. But as long as even the government revenue generated are not channeled through the banking system in a correct manner, and it goes from one hand to another hand, even before it reaches to the central bank, we will continue to face the same problem.
The central bank is hopeful that the US dollars it is injecting in the market will mop up excess local currency, stabilize the South Sudanese pounds, and encourage business across the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's central bank is set to list sugar and wheat on its foreign exchange restrictions list. The Apex Bank says the move is necessary for conservation of the country's foreign reserves and, of course, boosting local production of the items on that restriction list. Well, let's get the latest on that from Deji Badmus. He joins us now in Lagos. Deji, as always, good to have you with us on the show. Now, the CBN governor seems to have alluded to including sugar and wheat imports on that FX restriction list. We did see a similar move with milk exports recently, which caused, of course, an outcry, and we saw the CBN forced to lift some of those restrictions for some companies. So give us a sense, what has been the response to this announcement? And is it clear how soon we'll see the CBN make a concrete move on this?
Well, Uche, we haven't seen much of a response, so to speak, from the public, just as we saw in previous cases where the CBN actually updated at least in the past and all of that. So we haven't seen much. I think there's possibly an understanding at this time that the country just would not be able to cope because the country has a severe forex challenges, as we all know. I mean, you know, its earnings from oil has significantly dropped as a result of the fall in the price of oil and then the OPEC production cap. So that's a huge problem. The country is currently struggling to meet its obligation. And as you're well aware, the country has actually been borrowing. You know that the Naira has come under severe pressure lately as a result of this drought, if you like, in forex supply. So it's essentially why the CBN is doing this. And then the CBN believes there's enough local capacity, especially for wheat and sugar now, that it's now convenient to put it on the list of banned items now that are not qualified to get forex. But let's be clear, the CBN action does not translate to a ban in the importation of sugar and wheat. I mean, people can actually do that if they want to import. All they have to do is go and source the foreign exchange elsewhere. So they won't be qualified now to fill what you call the Form M now to get forex from the official market. So That's basically what's going to happen. And the truth is that, look, capacity, local production capacity for sugar and wheat has actually been going up. It's a different question whether Nigeria has actually attained self-sufficiency in those two products. Now, I'm not too sure, but there's no question at all that local capacity is being built up. More factories are coming up. Dangote Sugar, Dangote, for instance, is building a $500 million sugar factory. That is due to begin operation very soon. So I think that's what the CBN is looking at, with coming up now with this this initiative. We do not know when it's going to start, but I suppose it's going to be pretty soon. The announcement has now been made. I believe pretty soon the CBN will take action on that, and then importers of sugar and wheat would no longer qualify for Forex now through the official window. Uche?
Now, it's quite interesting because former Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who of course is now the head of the WTO, she said this move is causing some pause from WTO members who are complaining that Nigeria's decision to use FX restrictions to boost local production is posing some problems. Where does that discussion lie right now? Does Nigeria's CBN even care?
Honestly, I don't think the CBN cares. The CBN is obviously not listening to that. What Nigeria and the CBN is particularly concerned about is its own challenge. There is a huge challenge of Forex here, and the CBN, especially the Monetary Policy Committee now, would have to come up with different methods and different ways to deal with this problem. This, of course, is one of the ways. It's understandable that other countries would not be happy, that the WTO, of course, people would complain. That is quite understandable. But at this moment, the CBN is really bent on boosting local production because, look, Nigeria's food import bill has been quite high. And for quite a while now, honestly, because of the CBN's policy, that bill has been coming down. But it has not come down significantly enough. Nigeria spends millions of dollars importing wheat and sugar. And this country has, arable land. This country has the potential not just to produce what it needs now for its own consumption, but it has the capacity to also produce for export, and that's what the CBN is trying to do. So I do not really think the CBN is in any way thinking, looking over his shoulder now and thinking what, what the WTO might feel or what other countries might feel about this. For the CBN, it's essentially about Nigeria, and it's essentially about boosting local capacity and making the country, potentially an exporter of sugar and wheat as well.
Well, let's talk about the Naira, of course, the Nigerian currency, because these measures by the central bank are also supposed to help ease pressure on the Naira going forward. We know the country is struggling with a shortage of dollars as well. Now, given that the Naira, looking at it today, it's now at around 410 Naira per dollar at the importer and exporter window. Do experts really believe that these measures are really helping to support the Naira?
Well, honestly, I would say opinions are divided on it. No doubt at all. I mean, there's no question at all that somehow it's helping. It's reducing the demand for Forex, no doubt. Before now, we had about 42 items. Now you're adding wheat and sugar, so 43 or 44 items now. So there's no question at all that if people are not able to approach the official window now for their Forex, well, we're likely to see a reduction now in dollar demand. But then there's also the issue of where do they go to get their dollars? It means they would all have to crowd the parallel market. That's the black market. And the black market does not have that capacity to meet that demand. So it's obviously, you're still going to continue to have the pressure on the Naira. I think it's still going to be there. let's not forget, there's still the issue of petrol subsidy is still there. Nigeria spends close to $300 million every month subsidizing petrol. So it takes a huge chunk of the country's forex. It's a good thing that the country is planning to fix its refinery now and hoping that it'd be able to produce, to refine petrol domestically so that subsidy could go completely. But there's no question it will take more than these measures, of course, and the CBN, I think, understands that it will take more than these measures to ease the pressure on the Naira. The truth is that we need to see oil price go up considerably, and the global economy needs to pick up. Other than that, it's difficult to see how that pressure would ease on the Naira. So the only thing the CBN would continue to do is to continue to manage the situation now with measures like this. So it's to be candid, I do not envy the position of the CBN and the people in the Monetary Policy Committee. It's a very tough time, and the country is actually struggling, but it's actually managing to cope, and those in charge are just doing all they can to manage the situation. Uche?
Well, it's always great to have your insights on the show, Deji. That, of course, is Deji Badmus joining us there in Lagos. Well, still in Nigeria, the government is planning to inject about 396 billion naira, that's slightly more than $1 billion, to vaccinate its citizens against COVID-19. Now, the country's finance minister, Zainab Ahmed, says the spending will be utilized between 2021 and 2022. Now, the allocation may, however, reduce as the nation receives more donations from international donors and the private sector. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with more on that report from Abuja.
Conversation around purchasing more COVID-19 vaccines has been top on the agenda of Nigeria's government engagements, especially at the meeting of the Federal Executive Council. Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, has said that the supplementary budget is an effort to close the nation's COVID-19 vaccine deficit.
A total of not less than 43 million doses of vaccines. So they're supposed to find out when those ones will come, because if we are going to get the donated vaccines and at the speed of the current rollout, we have to be slowing down on what we're buying ourselves.
Recently, health authorities called for a halt in the ongoing vaccination exercise across the nation due to a shortage of supply. Nigeria received a donation of 3.94 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in March, barely enough to vaccinate about 1% of the country's 200 million strong population. Vaccine donations from other sources may significantly cut government's proposed spending.
This is working with partners that are donating these vaccinations. So we see the timelines of the donations and see the gap that the government needs to fill in 2021. But we have already provided to the ministry funds to enable them roll out the vaccines that...
Well, government says there are plans to vaccinate up to 70% of the population by the end of 2022. Global demand for vaccines has skyrocketed as countries accelerate their inoculation drives. It's still not clear when the next batch of vaccines are scheduled to arrive, but government assures that the inoculation schedule would not be affected. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. China's economy bounces back by 18.3% in the first quarter of this year. And France turns to a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. Now, official data published on Friday shows that China's economic growth for the first quarter of 2021 compared to a year earlier is the highest increase ever recorded. Authorities say the country's economic recovery is stable and provides solid momentum for future growth. But of course, they also warn of risks. Here's CGTN's Wang Mingjie with the details.
China's National Bureau of Statistics says GDP in the first quarter of 2021 hit more than 24 trillion yuan, up by 18.3% year-on-year. That's the highest year-on-year increase since data was first published back in 1993. An official from the Bureau explained why.
It was affected by unprecedented factors such as the low base figure of last year and the increase in working days due to staff staying put during the Spring Festival.
The official also gave an update on key industries as well as the state of employment in China.
Overall agriculture production was steady and pig production recovered significantly. The manufacturing industry demonstrated strong growth momentum and employment was generally stable.
While the official expressed optimism about the economic recovery, she also issued caution.
We must be aware that COVID-19 is still spreading globally, and the international landscape is complicated with high levels of uncertainty and instability. The foundations of the domestic economic recovery are yet to be consolidated, and long-standing structural problems remain prominent with new situations and issues arising from our development.
As part of the next stage of China's recovery, the official called for more efforts in promoting high-quality development to establish firm foundations for the future. Wang Mingjie, CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron wants to see a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And with just over a year to go until the next presidential election, his administration is looking to show its commitment to sustainable development. Well, Ross Cullen visits a wind farm in eastern France, to find out how.
The winds of green change are blowing in France, turbines spinning in the late winter sun, symbols of a growing renewable energy landscape.
I remember when I was a young kid, I used to watch some movies or even some, anime where there were wind turbines, and it was looking like the future.
Olivier Texier is the director of engineering for a Chinese company operating the wind turbines here, 160 kilometers to the east of Paris. The turbines more or less run themselves. They can assess whether the wind is strong enough to spin or too powerful to be able to operate safely, and they can change to face the direction and angle of the gusts. A wind turbine like this can provide enough electricity to power a small village, equivalent to the annual energy usage of around 12,000 people. A team of engineers monitors the output of the farm, troubleshooting if necessary.
I can see where we are. We have always local people either working for us, either working with us in the company. And that's really a typical thing of green energy, since you have PV panel, wind farm everywhere over the territory. It means you have employment everywhere in the territory. And that, I think, is a great advantage for this industry.
Chinese companies like CGTN Europe Energy bring experience in renewable power to the development of wind farm projects across Europe. China is one of the world's biggest producers of carbon emissions, but it also makes more than 70% of all solar panels and half the world's electric vehicles.
We believe that for our sustainable development, we should have some new resource of the energy, including wind power and solar power and some other types of the energies. And all these can change our energy diversity. This can help us to have a bright future.
The International Climate Agreement in 2015 was signed in France, and the government is keen to showcase the country as a model of green policies. But some critics of the government say the greening of the economy is too slow, while others challenge the investment in wind turbines.
There is a conflict over the use of inland wind turbines with people who want to conserve the countryside and tourism, so there is a contradiction between the development of wind turbines and other economic activity. It's an unresolved problem because there is a very significant movement against wind turbines here in France.
To meet European objectives, renewable energy must account for more than a third of primary energy consumption by 2030. The French energy model is not as carbon intensive as the UK or Germany, thanks to the nuclear industry. While the French government supports the sector, it also wants to cut its reliance on nuclear energy by 2035.
It's not the interest of the main nuclear producer to see competition coming with renewable and cheaper energy. And that's the paradox and the dilemma the government is facing every day.
Back in the countryside, the landscape is changing. Many landowners now see more economic benefit and political will in green projects rather than traditional rural industries. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Troyes, Eastern France.
Well, let's shift focus now. Many young Indonesian Chinese entrepreneurs are leaving their careers to transform their family businesses amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, traditional retail businesses in Indonesia suffered the impact of the pandemic, but one woman's passion turned her family business around by embracing the digital age. Here's CGTN's Silkina Al-Hualia reporting from Jakarta.
At just 25 years old, Nina Chokro is leading her family's business. Their sewing shop has been in the family for generations until the COVID-19 pandemic threatened to shut their business.
It was definitely a roller coaster ride, really a roller coaster, because at some point we were at our highest high, and frankly right now we're still in our low.
The company was founded 40 years ago by Nina's grandfather. This store is filled with memories of her childhood. Today, Nina has turned those fond memories into a successful online business.
We are continuing this legacy business, and we're making our grandfather proud. We're making our dad proud, so it's really fulfilling.
In just 1 year, Nina has increased the company's social media reach by targeting the younger generation.
We don't just want to provide them with just really basic general knowledge like this is how sewing looks like. No, we want people to know that sewing is fun, sewing is easy, and we are in this generation where everything is label driven, right? And the most general stigma of sewing, well, in Indonesia, is actually sewing is just for the elderlies. Sewing is just for homemakers. No, sewing is fun. The art is in the process.
Hai teman jahit! Nina produces video tutorials teaching young tailors how to sew. Her videos are more than just entertainment. They're educational and provides young creatives with a platform to express their craft. Small and medium businesses were impacted the most during the pandemic. Data shows at least 75% of them experienced a drastic plunge in sales. The government has been trying to support the industry by providing grants to as many as 12 million companies. Experts say ultimately innovation is key to long-term survival in today's economic climate.
So I think this is also the moment where the new generation experience new breakthrough to helping their parents or family business to survive during the pandemic. It's never happened before, like a 1998 financial crisis or even 2008 financial crisis. So it's totally the new momentum for young generation to take a leap forward.
Nina's shop has survived many of those challenges. But her determination to carry her family's legacy continues on, despite any crisis. Sulkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
And let's move on now. Here's a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices rising above $67 a barrel, gaining for a fifth straight session. That, of course, is as a stronger demand outlook and signs of economic recovery in China and, of course, the U.S. offset rising COVID-19 infections in some other major economies. Meanwhile, gold prices steady today. Robust economic data from the U.S. certainly helped the precious metal as it quashed support from lower treasury yields, though the metal did look set to post a second straight weekly gain on inflationary concerns. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still to come. We bring you a Ugandan startup that turns discarded banana stalks to eco-friendly items, as well as a Ghanaian company that provides solar-powered fridges and freezers in Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Shiwishi, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
let's head to Uganda, where a startup is giving a new lease of life to one of the country's biggest sources of waste, banana stalks. Now, the company processes these stalks from the banana plant that farmers usually burn or abandon, and then they turn it into fiber to create a variety of products. Well, Kimani Muturi, the founder of TexFad, says the 11 million tons of bananas that Uganda produces every year makes him confident their efforts will pay off with growing global demand for sustainable fiber.
Bananas have long been a staple in Uganda, and the average citizen honors its place by consuming more than 200 kilograms annually, according to estimates by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Typically, when farmers lop off bananas from the trees, they leave the bulky bulbous trunks to decompose and waste away. Now, a local startup in the East African nation is betting bananas can yield even more value through its natural fiber to produce environmentally conscious items.
We generate a lot of waste from the banana gardens. So I kept thinking, if this waste can be used for textiles, then we can be able to provide a sustainable product to the world. And then I started the journey for developing fibers from textile fibers from the waste stems.
The trunks of banana trees are split in half by machetes and fed into a machine. And from that process comes a long, leathery, moist fibers. So far, the company is exploring the fiber by making carpets, table place mats, and also hair extensions.
With cleaning the mats, it's very easy. When you try to clean them, they come back looking sparkling clean and almost as good as new. And definitely, I've come back to buy another one.
TexFad is also testing a process to soften banana fibers to the level of cotton so that it can be used to produce clothes. Kimani projects that TexFad will make 2,400 carpets this year, more than double last year's output, boosting revenue. The farm, which has 23 employees, made about $41,000 in sales last year, its best figures since launching in 2013. The company expects to ship carpets for the first time abroad in June to customers in the US, United Kingdom, and Canada.
We have wholesalers from the US who are asking us how many tons can we ship. We have people in Europe who are asking us about shipping prices, in Canada, in Australia, and many parts of even Africa also. But we cannot be able to meet this market.
Kimani believes banana fiber is the fiber of the future. Due to its versatility, he sees the possibility of this organically produced material replacing synthetic fibers. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Meanwhile, a company headquartered in Ghana is now piloting its solar-powered fridges and freezers in Senegalese and Ivorian fishing communities. The company's CEO, however, says it could be a useful tool in the continent's COVID-19 vaccination campaign. Here's CGTN's Joy Kiruki reporting.
It takes a boat to deliver a freezer to fisherman Antoine Fiani. His home is located on an island in southern Côte d'Ivoire, which is not connected to the electricity grid. Fiani's freezer is solar-powered. The Coolbox freezer is an African solution that could have another use, storing vaccines. It was developed by Ghana-headquartered PEG Africa with people like Fiani in mind. It is an affordable way to store perishable items in remote and off-grid areas.
Some of the fish we smoke to conserve it longer, or we put ice on it so we can keep it for 2 or 3 days before delivering to market. Today, the cost of buying the ice is a bit high, so we're looking at working with a solar-powered freezer.
Today, Fiani can store his catch for at least 10 days before taking it to the market. He and his wife pay for the Coolbox in regular installments. Fiani is using his freezer to store fish. However, PEG Africa CEO for Côte d'Ivoire, Thierry Adonis, says such cold chain technology is particularly important amid the global health crisis.
If the relevant departments and the health ministries don't follow this cold chain logic, then clearly people living in the more remote areas will not have access to the vaccine.
PEG Africa is currently piloting the solar-powered fridges and freezers in Ivorian and Senegalese fishing communities. With funding from other partners, PEG has also started providing solar power systems for off-grid health centers. Global health journal Science in Practice puts at nearly 60% the number of healthcare facilities in sub-Saharan Africa that have no access to electricity. This means the cool box could be a useful tool to ensure more of the population gets protected. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand, a standout performer this week across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. It's up nearly 3% this week, outpacing its peers in the region, as of course its relatively higher yield and stable political conditions help to boost the currency. Meanwhile, Nigeria's naira remained somewhat stable across FX markets today. It did strengthen slightly, and of course traders say that's as dollar supply improves significantly in the country. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.